All right, my name is Tanner Ross Gregory. I am Jesus Christ. Today I'm going to attempt to prove to you that I'm Jesus Christ, as well as each of these key points listed above. Okay, so the commands of Moses for people to stone each other to death for various acts such as prostitution or homosexuality, that was a bargain with our primitive urges of violence that we would more readily adhere to a more ideal form of government. All right. Jesus Christ's crucifixion was a means by which we were subdued in our willingness to continue proceeding with those violent commands. All right, so we had evolved past the point of those commands' usefulness. I see what happened in Jesus Christ. I cannot bring myself to do that any longer. All right. Jesus Christ put forward some commands on marriage. Those were a bargain with our primitive urges of sexual dominion that we would more readily adhere to a more ideal form of government. All right, so I could say this woman's my sexual property. I could say this man's my sexual property. In exchange, I will more readily go along with what you have to say about the government. All right. So what they did to me as Jesus Christ in order to subdue you in your willingness to continue proceeding with those commands is that they programmed me to become obsessed with this woman, made me see her having sex with all these different people for weeks on end, made me see her getting raped, and then had me running around yelling at people for what they made me see them do. All right. So on December the 4th and December the 15th of 2020, they made me see two separate women pregnant with my son from having had sex with different men. All right. So the date falling directly in between these dates is December the 10th of 2020. However, because the women were already pregnant when they were revealed to me, and because a woman has her period once a month, if she misses her period, then she's pregnant, then the date that we're concerned with is November the 10th of 2020. All right. So in the book of Revelation, it says that the dragon was waiting to consume the child the moment that he was born, but that the archangel Michael took the woman and the baby into the wilderness to be kept safe for 1,260 days. All right. So 9 months from November the 10th of 2020 is August the 10th of 2021. 1,260 days from August the 10th of 2021 is Inauguration Day of 2024. Okay, and so the dragon represents necessary evil, and so the reason that the dragon represents necessary evil is because they're saying it will be a form of necessary evil to kill my son before he inherit all of the power that I will receive to rule over this world as king. Okay, they actually did have me anoint my head with oil during the crucifixion stage, which I later came to find out does mean at some point I will be king. All right, but I'm not just going to rule over you as king. All right, so myself and the aliens, and even with the help of artificial intelligence as well, came up with a new libertarian constitution. It's several hundred pages long. So effectively what I'm going to be doing is just putting that in authority over you and then just being done. I'm not going to just split hairs and try to be a king or some shit like this. Okay. I'm a political savant, so I know how the government's supposed to work, and I know more about all this stuff than anybody. Ending the 17th Amendment is the biggest thing that we need to do right now, because prior to ending the 17th Amendment, there was no income tax. The federal government stayed around 3% GDP in their spending. I mean, people don't even know this shit. I know more about the government than anybody. But either way, so the 1,260 days sounds like a countdown, and so you might be asking yourself, what is this a countdown to? All right. So in the book of Revelation, it says that the Gentiles were allowed to march on the holy city for 42 months, but they've been assigned to the outer court. Okay, so the first beast rules for 42 months, and then immediately afterward comes the false prophet who makes miracles of fire come out of the sky in full view of all the people. Okay, so what does this mean? It means we're in a 42-month countdown right now, and at the end of the countdown, a certain group of people has to leave. If they don't leave, they're going to be killed by airstrikes. And what they are saying is not the Italian people, they're allowed to stay as well, but anyone who isn't Caucasian has to leave the country. Okay, and one of the biggest reasons why is because the reason Caucasian people have white skin is because they evolved in an extremely cold, dark environment. So we are naturally reliant on effective systems of government, and we're going to rig up the governments of these other countries and, you know, set it up to where their judicial system is appointed by our judicial system, and they can only vote for white people. But first and foremost, they're going to have everybody deported. All right. So there's a couple other prophecies that have to do with nuking California, which obviously on its face you can see that that's going to have to happen because it's 80% Hispanic. You can't just it's already a cesspit, but you can't just go through there. It would cost so much money to kill them all with airstrike, everybody who refused to leave and all this kind of thing. I didn't come up with this. It's totally crazy. This is what they want. All right. But it has to do with the 5 months that Noah spent in his ark because God told him he would never put him back in the ark. And then the 5 month, that correlates with the 5 months of scorpions' stings in the book of Revelation. And so the scorpions are police. It has to do with the 5 months that I spent in Wise County Jail immediately following my crucifixion. But the scorpions, it says they have breastplates of iron. They have this stinger on their hip. They have this, it's a golden tassel. They call it a golden crown on their head. They're talking about police officers. But what they're saying is that, see, the aliens had me sending out these messages like angering people. I kept telling these people, I was sending out messages to the mass media, to everybody. I was like, they keep telling me angering people, they won't stop. The government had already figured out that, because they understood, they had read my book and understood that the 5 months in Wise County Jail was, symbolic of the time I spent in jail. They had already figured out that, oh, well, if we get him placed in jail in California and we stage a sex trafficking situation and then we can have biblical permission to use nuclear weapons on California. And I don't want to go into all of it, but the government was working with aliens to stage this sex trafficking situation. Once they got me out to California, they drove me insane. They were dragging this woman around me and making her scream and act like she was in some kind of sex trafficking situation. The government was working with the aliens. The government, people in expensive cars and having us placed in rooms next to each other. Staging all this shit. The woman's screaming and crying, I can't deal with this anymore. I was like, screaming through the walls. Because they just played on what I said. I was like, by the time I get you out of the sex trafficking situation, you're going to be with somebody like this. Aliens were making me see this. I was like, they're going to wind up, she's going to wind up with this guy. And oh my fucking God. Anyways, the point of the story is, when I first got out there, they go, I want you to burn this place to the ground. I want you to burn this place to the ground, which I didn't understand that. And then they started talking a lot about Pizzagate, which pizza is code for, organized child kidnapping and sexual molestation and all this kind of shit. And there was this big thing called Pizzagate. There's a documentary called Pizzagate, Pedogate by Titus Frost. It's several hours long. I mean, people in the government, getting in control of the Amber Alert system, getting in control of the prosecution of sex trafficking crimes, all of them owning these little pizza restaurants with pedophilia code words, on the front of the building and all this shit. So a big part of what they're trying to accomplish is to say, oh, well, we're going to nuke this place because of look at what they're doing with this organized child kidnapping and all this kind of stuff. This is what they did in Egypt. They came in, they said, well, we're doing this because of the slaves. And then they did all those plagues one after the next. And then immediately afterwards introduced them to a new, very complex and elaborate system of government that they were supposed to accept. So we're in the same position with this new constitution. It's pretty complex. And essentially what they're doing is galvanizing us around that. And so I think they're basically hitting two birds with one stone. They're getting everyone out of California who isn't white, and they're just going to wipe that fucking place out with nuclear weapons, and then galvanizing the public at the same time. So, oh man, I could keep talking about that, but I'm not just going to keep talking about that. All right. So in addition to that, the suicide boys are the two olive trees from the book of Revelation. And so in the book of Revelation, it says the two olive trees will prophesy for 1,260 days. All right. So the Suicide Boys released an album called The Long-Term Effects of Suffering on August the 13th of 2021. All right. So 1,260 days following that is 3 days after Inauguration Day. So I believed that it was going to be martial law. So I started working on my book. For about a month to a month and a half, I only slept every other night while I just continually worked on the book. And then once I got the book finished, then for like 3 days, I sent out emails to thousands of churches and church attendees and all this kind of thing, thinking that all this stuff was about to happen. Well, it came and went, nothing happened. So I looked into the Old Testament where the two olive trees were first mentioned, and it talks about, the final capstone is in the hand of Zerubbabel. It talks about this flying scroll. And so what they're saying is the whole fucking prophecy, which kind of blew my mind, but what they're saying is that the book will be finalized and sent out to all these people by 3 days after Inauguration Day, which will set a series of events in motion that will end result in the police going to jail. You know, and then I think you can just naturally conclude. I mean, obviously, it's obvious why, because of the war on drugs. You know, this country locks up more people than any country in the world, and when you make something illegal like drugs or something like that, then you create a criminal black market right out of that. People get killed. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a terrible situation. So slavery and death. You know, this is what's coming out of these fucking people. And then the criminalization of prostitution. You know, I mean, the women end up with a pimp. They end up getting sex trafficked. All that stuff comes right out of. And these people think they're on some kind of fucking moral high horse. You know what I mean? To have the cops arresting somebody for drugs or prostitution. You're destroying this fucking planet. That's what you're doing. And a lot of people think, oh, well, we're free because we're a democracy. I get whatever I vote for, like Burger King. You know what I mean? This isn't Burger King, have it your way, or any kind of shit like that. Okay? It's a republic. You're supposed to have real laws that make sense. Prior to the 17th Amendment, this country made a hell of a lot more sense. But this is the situation we're in now.